Hi, today's video is about how you go about finding a rule from a table of values. So the first thing we're going to look at is the types of tables that we get. And you can see two examples of these tables here. So we have an input, and that's the value that goes into our equation, and then we have an output. And that's the answer to our equation or rule that we come up with. Sometimes in a table this might be called X, and this might be called Y, or a range of other letters. It doesn't really matter which ones that we use. But it's the input, that's the bit we're putting into our rule, and then our output, that's the answer that we're getting from our rule. So for our first one here, we have an input of 3 and then an output of 12. So one of the ways that we can look at our rule is we can work out if there is a difference. So that's one strategy we can use. Otherwise we can work out if they're multiples. So that means that they divide into each other, or you can multiply the input by a number to get the output. Sometimes they might be a combination of those as well. So for this particular one here, the difference between 3 and 12 is 9. The difference between 4 and 13 is also 9. The difference between 5 and 14 is 9. 6 and 15 is 9. And 7 and 16 is 9. We could have also looked at the differences between 12 and 13, and that would have been 1. 13 and 14 is 1. 14 and 15 is 1. And 15 and 16 is 1. And that tells us that we have a rule that stays the same for each, because it only is going up by the same amount each time. So what we can see here is that from the input, we're adding 9 every time it's the same amount. So the input plus 9 is giving us our output. Now we don't usually write rules with the words input and output in them. So let's call our input X and our output Y. And we're going to say then, so Y equals, which was our output, and then X for our input plus 9. So remember we were calling the input X and the output Y. Okay, that's what we've decided they would be. So therefore the rule is Y equals X plus 9, and that's our rule for A. When we look at B, so in this case we had a difference, like we looked at a difference. So in this one, we can have a look again. So this time, let's look for that difference. So that's 6. The difference here is 12. The difference here is 19. The difference here is 24. And the difference here is 30. So unlike this one where they were all the same, the differences are not the same. So because of that, we're not going to just add a value. Okay, this time we need to look for a different option. So look for multiples. So we can get 1 times 7 equals 7. 2 times 7 equals 14. 3 times 7 equals 21. 4 times 7 equals 28. 5 times 7 equals 35. So the consistent thing here is multiplying the input by 7. If you also have a look here, what you can see is that's a difference of 6, 7, a difference of 5, a difference of 6. So we're not seeing any great pattern here, so that doesn't actually help us. But if we go back to this idea here, we had it multiplied by 7. So 7 divided by 1 is 7. 14 divided by 2 is 7. 21 divided by 3 is 7. So you can do that way to check as well if it's going to be a multiplication one. So we'll have our input times by 7 will equal our output. So we write that again. So we're going to give our input the letter X and the output Y. Like I said, you can use any different values for this. So it'll be Y equals 7 times X, which we can write as Y equals 7X. So therefore, the rule is Y equals 7X. So that's how you find the two different types of rules that you might encounter for your tables. Once you've done that, a question might ask you to make a prediction. So for the second part of this question here, we want to predict the output if the input is 23, let's say. So we're not going to want to continue our table all the way there because that's a really long table, but what we can do is we can have a look at our rules. So we're going to let X be 23 because our input, remember, was equal to X, and then we're going to put that into our equation. So it'll be Y equals 7 times 23, and then we would use our calculator to calculate that. So 7 times 23 equals 161. So then Y equals 161. And that's our answer. Okay guys, so hopefully you know now how you can go about calculating a rule from a table. Alright, have a great day.